the next ancient mystery called Raphanidosis, which was a punishment sometimes used in ancient Greece, usually for adultery. It involved the criminal being sodomized with a radish. I think one or both of the parties in adultery, which I thought a radish was, more of a round sort of that red thing. I know maybe it's a purplish red. And then I was like, oh yeah, there is the radishes that are, thick and white and they could do some damage, which was the intention. They intended to, not for pleasure, just to really give it to you until that caused hemorrhaging and hopefully you died. I don't think everyone died all the time, but that was the goal. That was the punishment. Instead of just putting you to death, they potentially sodomize you to death with a radish. Then, the prostitution stories, I understand. Strabo talking about the temple prostitutes at Corinth trying to raise money for Aphrodite's rites and whatnot. And then in Cyprus, I think it was, where women had to offer themselves up to strangers before they got married at the temple for money. So they had to be prostitutes the night before they got married. And finally, today's subject is the Rex Nemorensis ritual at the temple of Diana at Erisea, where the previous priest got in order for him to be replaced. This is what I'm going to go in depth on today. And keep in mind, the ancients had ritualistic killings, potentially a free pussy day or subsidized or a cheap payment of local engaged women. And what about you? You get a free burger when the local sports team scores a certain number of points. It's a different world than where we come from. So to start, I never knew this one until I read the book Roman Religion and the Cult of Diana at Erisea, which I think I randomly stumbled upon this book while searching Amazon. And of course, this stumbling upon it reveals to me one thing that I can actually remember, and that's man hunting man in a forest. Apparently, Fraser talks about this in his book The Golden Bough, which is a famous book from over 100 years ago that I have not read. Yeah, that's a good thing because he got some things wrong about it, apparently. At least this part of the story, in this part of the book. He made it seem like the Rex Nemorensis, which is the title of the priest, and it means king of Nemi. And Nemi is the lake where the temple is set, also called the Mirror of Diana. So you have the lake, the forest, which is sacred and protected. And I think it's all within a crater of some sort. And to quote from the Roman religion book, it says the Rex was king as well as priest, a leader of the community as well as servant of the goddess. Anyway, Fraser said that the priest was a guy who was armed and always had to be on guard against attack from some random man who was trying to be the next priest, if he successfully killed the current one. And he also said that the priest had a job that included guarding a sacred oak tree. But that doesn't seem to be the case, nor is it the case that any random person could show up and murder him. There was a whole ceremony to it. And Book 6 of the Aeneid by Virgil, Aeneas has to complete all these tasks in order to be able to visit the underworld and see his father and talk to his father. That seems to be based on this whole process at the Temple of Diana. And the whole ritual is supposed to be symbolic of hunting, since Diana is the goddess of the hunt. And many members of the town of Latium, which is like near the temple, would have been hunter warriors. Thus, the challenger and priests have to hunt one another to the death. So if it wasn't any random guy, who was the challenger? Well, he had to be a guy who was exiled from somewhere else or was a fugitive slave and had nowhere to go. He had to be chosen by some kind of higher-ups in the religious order. Now, this was a man without resources, and if he got selected and he was successful in his mission, he would be transformed from a nobody into the Rex Nemorensis. And the first part of the process was the challenger had to sneak into the sacred forest in order to take a particular bough from a tree. Likely, this was some type of mistletoe. And this all precedes any fight that takes place. Now, I think he had to sneak past the priest or in the priest's traps in the forest. I'm not sure, really. I don't know if the priest is allowed to defend the forest yet, or it's more of just a straight shot. He has to go in and take it. Wasn't really clear on that. But one theory is that he had to retrieve the bough and then present it to a priestess. Now he had to do this in order to get a weapon for the upcoming battle, which was a sword. Because it was said that, the priest always had a sword with him ready to go. And the act of taking the bough from the forest, the mistletoe, out of there, violated the sanctuary of the goddess of Diana. And because of that, it required some payment in blood as a result. And the death had to be paid in the battle between the priest and the challenger. Now, the priest wasn't under constant attack from challengers, and this usually only happened a few times when the religious class or the emperor wanted to make a move against him, maybe for political reasons or some natural disaster took place, and that was the fact that it happened, disaster happened, was taken to be a sign that change needed to occur, or because the priest was too old and just needed to be replaced. It says in the book that, quote, "The Rex lived in the wild and ritually represented the law of the wild. No one, man or animal, is ever safe. It was part of his ritual identity that the Rex must always display his readiness for such an attack. He carried a sword because his ritual function was to live in the wild, to be the hunter who was always hunted." And the priest has a lot of shamanic qualities from other archaic people. Like, he's the ruler of that part of the wild. He's the priest. He's completely apart from the community. So I noticed a lot of overlap with that in what Eliade talks about in his books. And nobody got to watch the actual battle between the priest and the challenger. So it was all a one man goes in, two men enter, and one man leaves. Very Arnold versus the Predator, and how it all went down. So except the Rex, he had the advantage because he knew the forest like the back of his hand, and he spent years preparing for that challenge, learning to hide, learning to set traps, digging pits for the challenger to fall in, stuff like that. And the challenger, he had the advantage of being usually younger and stronger, because you're going to pick a younger guy to go after the priest. Make sure he has an advantage. So he had that advantage, but he didn't know the terrain itself. So he had the longer, more arduous position to be in, more arduous journey to undertake. He have to hunt down the priest, avoid all those traps, and bring the priest out into direct combat in order to actually utilize his strength and youth. I'm actually totally for bringing this sort of thing back in order to inhabit certain positions in our society. Like, how many positions are just held by people who won't let them go or are doing a bad job, and we could get some kind of exile, some member of the community that's an outcast, and they fight to the death. Maybe this time we put it on TV. Is that I think that's Hunger Games, or no? I think that's well, either way, whatever. Anyhow, in the fight, only one man could come out. If the challenger won, he would have to go through the rest of the ritual. And I guess if the priest won, on rare occasion maybe that happened, he got to stay, and I don't know how long they would have to wait to bring another challenger at him. So after he wins the challenger, the first thing he has to do is burn the body of the former priest on a pyre. And then he has to take the bones and place them in front of a cave/tomb. This was probably where the previous line of priests had been placed. And it symbolized the underworld, the entrance to the underworld. And since the challenger probably hasn't eaten, slept, or had much water during the hunt of his hunting of the priest, it's thought that he would probably be close to an ecstatic state. And he has to sit there and await a vision of the underworld coming into his mind. I guess a trial by ordeal. And he gaining the, quote, magical powers of the shaman in the process of the ritual. The challenger was a man with nothing to lose. And he undertook the ritual and the learning process, where if he failed at all, he was dead. He got the bough and was rewarded by being granted access to the forest, where he was constantly being hunted by the priests, or just having to elude the traps he set. So once he has killed and given the death rites to the former priest, he has this vision of the underworld. When he comes back from the journey to the underworld, he's now the Rex Nemorensis. And whatever experiences or knowledge he found in the underworld, he's now brought back to the upper world. And it says in the book, he is, quote, "now fully and completely Diana's servant and priest. All normal connections that defined a man in this world, his ancestors, family, city, inherited gods, rituals, children, had been obliterated for the new Rex Nemorensis, first by his fugitive state and then by the priesthood. He had no personal future whatsoever. His future belonged forever to the goddess.